In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate the advantages and disadvantages of using Photoshop versus Illustrator for creating patterns. We're going to start in Photoshop, and the first thing we want to do is to open up our artwork. I've scanned in some watercolor ferns that I want to use to demonstrate how I would approach creating patterns in both Photoshop and Illustrator. So I'm going to look for those ferns in my scan file. And there they are. I'm going to open them up. You can take a photo of your artwork if you don't have a scanner, but they're pretty reasonable now. I have the one that I used, which was under $100 on Amazon. So I would highly suggest if that you have that in your budget to do so. You can just get a better quality image. So I've opened up the scan, and the first thing I typically do is I go to Adjustments and Levels, and I'll grab this white dropper and grab the background and make sure that my white is actually white. So you can see I've zoomed in, and I'm going to try to get all these little bits cleaned up. This used to take much longer before Photoshop created this wonderful magic eraser tool, so you can really get in there and clean it up. If you find that it's deleting really light areas, you can adjust your tolerance here down to 20, 10, etc. The higher that tolerance is, the more it's going to grab, and if you lessen it, it's going to be a little more intricate. All right, so we've got it mostly cleaned up. For the point of this demonstration, I'm not going to completely refine it. I just wanted to show you the process that I do when I'm bringing watercolors in for either creating prints or for pattern making. Ooh, you can just press Control Z and that will undo any mistakes that you make. You can also press Shift E again and change your eraser tool to, instead of being the magic eraser tool, you can just have the regular, and then you can bracket left, bracket right to change your brush size or your eraser size and clean up the edges or anywhere else. The next thing you can do is you can go ahead and grab your lasso tool, which is L for shortcuts, and then you're gonna select your motif. You're going to cut and paste. Now this guy is on its own layer. You can rename it here. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and redo this process quickly. We're going to grab these, Control cut. Oh, I was on the wrong layer, so I'm going to do that again. You have to be on the initial layer to cut it, so if you run into that, cut, paste, then you're going to shortcut to your selection tool again, which is V. Now he's on his own layer, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. Make sure we're on the right layer. Control X, Control V, or Command, I think it is for Mac users. I'm a Dell user, so these guys are separate, those guys are separate. So if something feels wonky, just take a deep breath, grab it, go back to your selection tool, and then just start. It took me, I'm so used to Illustrator, it took me a while to get comfortable in Photoshop. And I used to think it was the program, but most often it's actually us, unfortunately. See, I'm on the wrong layer again, so I need to make sure I click that. And now we have this one. I'm just going to leave the rest of these for now. Okay, in this next step, what we're going to do is create a new layer, a new fill layer, and solid color. I'm just going to do, I don't want to use a clipping mask in this situation. I'm just going to go to OK. And I'm just going to grab a color that I think might work for what I'm creating here. Just go with that for now. Press OK. Now we have our background color. And make sure that we drag that all the way to the back here. Okay, next we're going to magically go to View, pattern preview, and then you can see that we can start creating something that'll look like a pattern. You can also replicate these motifs and move them around in different ways so they look like different motifs. But what I do like in Photoshop is that your artwork is going to look a lot like your original artwork. So if you liked how you painted it, the colors, or drew it, and you're good with the colors, you're not planning on recoloring it, then this is when I like Photoshop. Illustrator I typically use when I plan to recolor. So that's why I wanted to demonstrate when I do and do not use Photoshop. I love it for these ferns, for example, or animals, or a floral composition that's kind of blending together that are not separate motifs. This will look beautiful once I finish designing this in its original traditional state, and then we'll go ahead and finish up here in Photoshop, and then we'll move over to Illustrator and show how I would take the same artwork and create a pattern in Illustrator. A couple last things before we leave here though, in case you haven't created a pattern in Photoshop, what you'll do is you can zoom out here and see that we have something like a pattern starting to happen. But when you want to go ahead and export this, I'll go back out of View, Pattern Preview, and you have your square here now, or your rectangle, your pattern ready to export. So I'll go to File and then Export As. And then a JPEG if you're sharing it for social uses, for Spoonflower and things like that. And then in some cases, companies will want the PDF, so then you'll go to Save As, and that's where you can actually grab a PDF or a TIFF for some companies as well. All right, let's move on to Illustrator. Let me know if you have any questions. We're going to do the same thing in Illustrator now. We're going to go ahead and open, and I'm going to find my scanned file of the ferns. Here she is. Okay, we're opening that up, and we can approach this in a couple different ways, and we've touched on this in our live calls and in our Vector Your Art lesson. We can either do grayscale, or we can do black and white logo, or sketch start. It just depends on what you're going for your project at hand. And today I think I'll do grayscale, and maybe I'll also do black and white logo. So we'll go up to Windows, Image Trace, and we'll go to Shades of Gray. Okay, so we have our image in grayscale. We can go to Advanced, and we can bring the noise, it's down, but it actually increases the texture and contrast a bit there. What did I also wanted to mention that sometimes I initially bring my artwork in Photoshop, and like I demonstrated before, you can adjust the levels to increase the deepness of the saturation. So when you do bring it over to Image Trace, that it's a little cleaner and darker. I was lucky enough with these scans that they look dark enough that they're not going to fade into the background, and I shouldn't lose any of the bits, if so just a little bit. Okay, now that that's processed, I'm going to go to Object, Image Trace, Expand, and then Shift Control Ungroup, or just go up here, Object, Ungroup. And then what I like to do is press Control 9. I've made that shortcut to select the same color, so it grabbed anything that was the same color background. And you're just going to do this cleanup process. It's not too bad here, so again, I'm going to go Control 9. It's going to grab the rest of that because it's all the same color, but it doesn't grab it all because there is still some, let's see here, actually it did a pretty good job cleaning up. I see some here. So that is how it would look in the grayscale method, and then we can recolor it here. And we always want to go ahead and choose one color. And then let's give it some color here. And that's, my friends, is what it would look like in grayscale method versus Photoshop. So I think I noticed that there is still some bits in here. So again, there's going to be a little bit of cleanup, Control 9, which selects the same color fill. There still might be some bits, so then we're going to do the shortcut Q in Illustrator is the shortcut for the lasso. In Photoshop, it's L. It's a little tricky, but you'll get used to it. And then we're going to do control group. And now we have this guy separate as a motif to create a pattern. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do the black and white method next. But this should really help with seeing how they look similar to the Photoshop method, but the gradients just aren't as nice. It does look vectorized, but we can recolor this in infinite ways to be within a collection and be cohesive. So again, positives and negatives of using each program, but each are valuable for whatever your end result that you're going for. So I've opened up my artwork once again, my original artwork, and these are pretty complex motifs. You can do the same thing with just little line drawings or simple paintings and separate motifs. This is just what I was excited to work with today to show you the potential of what you can do. So again, we have our artwork. We've opened up our image trace tools, and this time we're going to go to black and white logo, which is very much like sketched art. I just prefer black and white logo. I'm going to go ahead and process that, and then I'm going to bring the noise up to get every detail and our threshold up. So when I use black and white logo, I typically do the first layer very high so that I'm almost getting a solid backdrop to create the artwork on. So in this case, this is what I would do for the first layer. So we're going to go to Object, Image Trace, and Expand. And then we're going to go to Object, Ungroup. And again, we're just going to select that background and delete it out. And we can select a color for it. So we already have one. It's not wanting to do it. There we go. I want to share how I bring in color palettes. Sometimes I'll use personal photos, or other times I'll find color palettes on Pinterest or just in general. And what I do is I'll just make these squares, and I'll use an eyedropper and press down Alt and then Control D, 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 D to duplicate. And I'll just grab the eyedropper, direct select, eyedropper, direct select, and eyedropper. Just makes this process a lot quicker when we learn these shortcuts. And then we're going to go ahead and select all these and bring them into our artwork. Bring them to the side here, and then when you have them all selected, you can click on this new color group folder and yes or okay, and then now you will see them here. And when we go to recolor them in our recolor tool, you can just choose one color and then these options, and we can filter through. We're going to select one again, and I'm not sure, one second. So I ran into this last time with you guys. I wanted to show you. So I went to recolor, but it wouldn't let me recolor. So what has happened sometimes is Illustrator resets to this grayscale, and you just want to come down to RGB, and then we're going to select all of our artwork, and then we'll try that again. We're going to do colors, 1, and then we're going to choose our color palette, and it's doing it again. Let's see what's going on. Back here again, it wanted to do it again. Let's try this, and then we'll come here. There we go. So we're gonna run into challenges frequently, but when you can just take a deep breath and try to figure it out, or jump on Google and just type in the issue that you're having, or reach out to our community or Instagram stories. I very often find help pretty quickly, someone that has experience in something that I don't, and you can reciprocate when it comes to the time where you have different experiences. All right, so once we're okay with that, we like that, we're going to go okay and yes. And then we have our initial color, What I like to do is I'll save this file. I have a patterns file, so I'll say ferns, rust. I'll save that. And then what I want to do again is to open up our artwork once again. I'm going to go to my scans, find my ferns. This just shows how much artwork I've created in the last couple years here. So this time we're going to go ahead and do black and white logo again. And we're going to bring all the noise up. And this time I want this threshold to be much lower. Lower than that. Even lower. Because we're going to layer it right on top of that other one. All right, this should be okay. I'm going to go to Object, Image Trace, Expand, and then Ungroup. We're going to select Same Color Fill. In this case, I'm just going to group it together, but if I was doing this for a pattern, I would grab each of those motifs separate. I'm going to go ahead and pop it on top of these guys. I'm going to grab my eyedropper, make it the same color initially, and then you can either make it darker or lighter depending on what you're going for. And we're just going to go ahead and line it up with that artwork. And as you can see, so now it just gives it this dimension and texture, and you can play with it by doing it darker, lighter, offsetting it, lining up, whatever you prefer. But this is how I would approach the image trace tool with my motifs with the black and white logo or sketched art technique. So now it just gives it this dimension and texture, and you can play with it by doing it darker, lighter, offsetting it, lining up, whatever you prefer. But this is how I would approach the image trace tool with my motifs with the black and white logo or sketched art technique. So for a quick recap, we talked about bringing in our original artwork in ink, watercolor, gouache, whatever it may be. We can scan it in or take a photo and bring it into Photoshop to keep our original artwork feel. But in that case, we're typically planning on using the original artwork color. You can recolor it in Photoshop. I just don't feel that it gives me the organic colors that I'm typically looking for, but many other artists have found success, and you can probably find lessons on that as well. What I like to do if I know that my artwork is going to be, or the pattern's going to be used in a collection or for specific purpose to license a design in several colorways, I will typically bring it in Illustrator, where I have the option to create something graphic like this with the black and white logo or sketch logo technique, or the grayscale option, which will give us this gradient feel, not as true to my original artwork as I'd like it to be, but it still feels cohesive and clean as long as it's single monotone colors that I'm going for, and then I have the opportunity to recolor in many different ways. I hope this was helpful. One last thing to mention, the key to finding success in creating a design that is in your mind is to always start with informed decisions. Where do you think your artwork is going to land or hope it's going to land? And then from there, you can backtrack and decide if you need your end pattern to look like your traditional artwork or something more graphic or something that just has the ability to be in several different colorways. So if you're taking the time to make those informed decisions as you're planning your pattern, you'll save yourself a lot of time and energy.